There we go. Thank you all for joining us for MIT Mondays, which is our attempt at demystifying um, the graduate school application process and more so MIT as an institution. So we are joined today by Kimberly Bennett, who you'll get to meet in a second. Um, and I am Denzil Streete, Senior Associate Dean and Director of Graduate Education here at MIT. And so I'm in the Office of Graduate Education, and I'm joined by my colleague, Jocelyn Powers, who is going to make sure you have all the relevant links that we may discuss in today's session um, in the chat. And if you can, via the chat, we'll also take your questions, or via the Q&A, actually. We'll take your questions so that we can keep track of them, put them anytime during the event, and we'll get to them before we end. So Kimberly, thank you for joining us. This is sort of a reunion in that Kimberly was the first graduate student I met literally on day one. Starting at MIT, I went to Kimberly's lab because I heard of the great work of her PI, Paula Hammond. So I spoke with Kimberly on my first day at MIT. So Kimberly, tell us a bit about yourself, where you're from, where did you study as an undergraduate, and what sort of inspired you to pursue a PhD?
Yeah. Hi everyone, again, Kimberly. I am now a fourth year grad student here in the HST program, but originally I grew up kind of in the middle of the Mojave Desert, which if you're not familiar is kind of that like desert out in like California, Arizona, Nevada area. I did my undergrad at the University of California in Riverside. So not too far away from where I lived, in one of those UC schools that I know people hear of, like UCLA and Berkeley. It's the lesser known kind of cousin school, UC Riverside, which was actually an HSU, so Hispanic Serving Institution. So kind of going from there, from bioengineering, and then coming here to MIT and HST, which is the Health Sciences and Technology or Medical Engineering program. So those are kind of like where I'm from. But I think to answer your more later question of like what kind of pursued me or like what kind of pushed me to come into a PhD program, I admittedly am a first gen student. And so I had kind of no idea that one, college was a thing, and then much less grad school was a thing. And so kind of my journey, we can talk more into details if interested, but essentially it was a lot of my teachers in high school were like, you should go to college. They kind of pushed me towards applying to college, applying to undergraduate. I had gotten into UC Riverside, went there, really liked bioengineering, and it was my undergraduate like research mentors who then saw my potential, was like, you should apply for a PhD. And I was like, what is that? Like, I have no idea what that is. Like, what do you mean? And them kind of like seeing kind of the potential, seeing that like I was curious about things, I wanted to learn things, I was interested in science, interested in translational science. So actually being able to make something that could help a person in the future. And they were kind of the ones who pushed me into this PhD like path and like saw my potential and really like empowered me to do it. And so now I'm here, one, to like do the research and like study a field that I'm really interested in that could impact human health. But on the flip side, I see education as like a very powerful thing, especially coming from a first gen low income background where like my community doesn't have that kind of education. And so I see it as more like also empowering kind of like the people who would come after me and behind me and kind of like encouraging them that they too can also make it here.
Nice. So there was a lot packed into there, and I
Yeah.
also disaggregate them. So let's start off with the obvious one. So many of our attendees may feel as though, or the viewers who would view the recording afterwards, they may feel as though, oh, yeah, I'm also first generation, but I just don't have the confidence within me to apply to an institution like MIT, which I may believe is very tough to get into. So before we even get to applying to MIT, walk us through what were your experiences as an undergraduate that you think prepared you well for even considering a PhD?
Yeah, so I feel like the main thing, like I said, was like research. So like kind of getting involved in like a research lab, just kind of seeing a day-to-day of like what is research you can do as a career, what does that look like? Kind of just like being exposed to that was really important, and more specifically being exposed to my mentors who were, professors that ran these labs, and kind of seeing what they did, what their job was, seeing how they mentored students, et cetera, was like the biggest like influence, I would say, is like just being exposed that that is an option, it is out there. I think in terms of like confidence, I don't know, I'm always used to like putting in an application for things and then getting it turned down, or putting it in and then maybe getting it. And so like I kind of developed this philosophy in undergrad of just like applying for everything, which I think stemmed from the fact that like again, as like a low income student, I needed to pay my way through college. And so I applied to like all these scholarships. Did I win every single one of them? No. But like just kind of getting into the habit of like putting myself out there, trying to see what I could get was, I think, a skill that helped me in the long run, because at the end of the day, when I was applying to a PhD, like very like transparently, when I was applying for my PhD, I applied both to programs because I was interested in them, but then also to like industry jobs and like other options because I just didn't know what would happen. And so I think in terms of confidence wise, it's more of a, I would just say to put yourself out there and just try, because you never know what would come back. Like I didn't think myself that I would get into MIT. I was like, oh, no, there's no way, but like I'm gonna try anyway. And I
Right.
think that ability to just try anyway is the biggest thing.
Perfect. And so to extend the sort of demystifying, how do you get from where you were, especially if where you were, wasn't Harvard, right? Or wasn't some well-known institution. You're also in a field that's not clearly associated with an undergraduate major. So you can see, oh, I was an undergraduate chemistry major, and now I'm a chemistry PhD student. Talk to us about your background at the undergraduate level that got you into the HST program.
Yeah, so HST, like I mentioned, is like medical engineering and medical physics is like the name of the program, or health sciences and technology. So it as a program is very interested in translational science, and that means taking something from like a lab and then translating it or taking it into the clinic or into a patient, or kind of bringing it from one space into an actual like clinical, like medical space. And so what kind of got me interested in that was again being exposed to a lab in undergrad where I worked with two PIs. So it wasn't just one, it was one who was a chemical engineer and one who was a professor in the School of Medicine, and kind of being in both of their labs on the same project and kind of watching how they talked to each other, of just how does this doctor talk to this engineering doctor, and like the different kind of like um vocabulary that they would use, how they would tackle the same problem but from different lenses, just kind of being able to see kind of that blend between the engineering and the like medicine side was really fascinating to me. And that's kind of what pursued me to HST, because my background was in bioengineering, which is in engineering, but I felt like I didn't really have the bio side. I didn't really have the like health piece. And so kind of seeing how my PIs collaborated made me realize I want to be at that intersection where I can talk to both those people, both the engineers in the room, but then also like the medical professionals, and be able to actually work together in the team in the future.
Perfect. So you've identified sort of the direction you want to go in. Um, Talk to us about the application process. I know some of our viewers may be right at the application stage. So talk to us about sort of the hacks you developed as an undergraduate student in coming up with a list of schools you applied to and putting together a competitive application.
Yeah, so I would say it was a couple of different things that I considered. I think one, like you mentioned, like just trying to find a list of schools of like where I was interested in was a really big thing. So I developed a philosophy of I only applied to schools that like I would 100% be happy with going to. And so, like I mentioned, like I also applied to industry jobs. I also applied to these other things. And so if something was going to take me away from that, it had to be something that like I could see myself at. And so by see myself at, it was a couple of different things. One is the research itself. So like are professors at the university in fields that I am interested in terms of also, aside from just research, other things I considered was like location. So like, was the location in a place where I feel like I would be supported? Was it in a location where like I would have access to like things that I valued, community, etc. I also looked more into like financial resources. And so like were these schools that had high track records of either giving financial aid to students or having resources to help students then apply for other like fellowships and things like that. Um, so I think kind of like keeping in mind both the research, professors that were there, but then also kind of a more like community, family-based thing, as well as money, I think also was a big driver as to like where I would choose. And so that kind of narrowed my list down. And then from there, kind of just put in the applications and let it happen. And what happened happened. Like it is how it goes.
Perfect. And I think I'll just stop here because I just met a student who was applying to PhD programs last week who didn't know that at top PhD programs, you actually get paid, right? So that it costs the student nothing. You get a stipend, you get your tuition covered, healthcare, in some cases, transportation, dental, vision, right? So I just want to be explicit about that because apparently there still are people applying to PhD programs not knowing that that is the reality. So
Exactly.
I'll put that out there. So that when Kimberly talked about, she looked at stipend levels, right? How much she was being paid. You could tell from different schools how much their stipend levels are, whether it's $30,000, $50,000, $45,000. You can tell that in your research. So talk to us a bit about, so you're here at MIT now. What attracted you to MIT? And I know you spoke a little bit before about the program. So what attracted you to MIT?
Yeah, so I would say, like I said, a couple of different things. One, stipend and like all the financial benefits are very nice. So that's just a little side note to put out there. Like Denzil said, insurance, health insurance, dental, all those things. I would say MIT was one of the higher ones up there in terms of like what benefits they provided. But in terms of like what really drew me to MIT, I think it was more just people. So I feel like with all of my interviews, also both like official interviews as part of like the admissions process or kind of informal interviews where I would hear people talk in like a situation like this, where there's like a podcast or some sort of like if I reached out to someone on LinkedIn and asked to meet with them and then like had a chat with them, just any sort of kind of interaction I had with MIT people was always a great one. Like it was always just a really positive interaction. It was always people like willing to help, willing to chat, willing to like give their advice, their guidance. Like I had so many people offer to like read my essays and like give me advice on them. So I think it was just overall just feeling that kind of sense of like community and then also just like helpfulness and like collaboration is what really drew me. Because overall, like, yes, there's other schools that can be competitive on like the research level or like other like aspects, but I feel like overall the people at MIT were the most like friendly and collaborative, and that's what really drew me at the end of the day.
Perfect. So anyone listening may think, oh, this was just a walk in the park, right? You figured out the schools you wanted to apply to, you pulled together, materials for the applications, you just talked about getting some help in reviewing statements, etc. And then you landed at MIT. Talk to us a bit about being a little bit more realistic. What were some of the challenges you faced in that process, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest like challenges, like more mentally, I would say, is like when I was telling people in my undergrad that I was applying, I feel like I got a lot of like discouragement of like, oh, like why are you even applying? Like there's no point in applying. Like don't even bother. Like don't worry about it. And I'm just like, I don't know how to take that if everyone around me is kind of telling me that I shouldn't consider it. Like I didn't have the highest GPAs. Like I can be very transparent. Like I did not have like, crazy 4.0, perfect GPA, perfect SAT, perfect like GRE, like things like that. Like I've never had kind of those like high bars. And so I feel like there was a lot of self-doubt of like, am I wasting my time? Like, should I even like consider this? Like, is this even something I should look forward to? And even now, like while I'm in my PhD, sometimes I think that way of like, am I even going to make it to like the next stage in my career? Like, do I even see myself there? Can I actually make it, et cetera? And I feel like it's a lot of self-talk that I need to like cut. And I feel like that was the biggest challenge of like just saying to do it anyway, because you just never know. So I feel like that was the biggest challenge. I think also logistically, applications can be very expensive for grad programs. And so I was lucky to get fee waivers, which I know MIT does offer fee waivers, and I was very supportive and like very happy to receive those. Some schools don't. And so like I think also just kind of weighing like how much money can I actually afford. And so like I didn't apply to that many programs, one, because there was not too many I wanted to apply to, but then also because I couldn't afford to apply to so many. And so I think that was also a pretty real like aspect of it, of like having to keep in mind like how much I could kind of put into an application. And then also with the applications themselves, like they take so long to write and craft and edit. And especially if you're kind of catering each one to any school that you're applying to, like it can be a very hard process. And so I think kind of just keeping that in mind, especially when it's like your senior year where you have like all these other things going on. Like I had a senior design project. I have also research that I was trying to like get a paper and like start writing things on. I was trying to do my honors thesis. I had all my classes that I was trying to finish up, etc. And then also grad applications. And so I think just being kind to yourself and giving yourself the grace is important.
Perfect. And thank you for being vulnerable there and talking about real challenges students face in applying to graduate school. So now you're at MIT. Talk to us a bit about your research, but not just, I think the research could be the endpoint, but how did you end up in the lab that you are in? Like, what was that process like? And then lead that into the research that you're doing now.
Yeah, so that is kind of a funny question, and I'm probably not a very good representative like answer of that. Like, I would hope that no one else has the same experience as I did. But essentially, how it normally goes is here in HST at like MIT, you come into the program and then you have a year to kind of like rotate in different labs, try different ones out, and then choose by the end of the year what lab you're interested in. So it's more of a like indirect kind of program, as they call it. And so you kind of go, you go through your rotations, you search for a lab, etc. Um, in my case, it was a little different. It was more of I had come in with kind of like a list of names of PIs that I was interested in. Um, Basically, they were either like in kind of the drug delivery, which is one aspect of my research, or in kind of the like brain related application, which is the other aspect of my research. And so either drug delivery or brains, these two kind of research topics that I really wanted to have like both of. Had my list. I came in and very immediately talked to all these professors, and they didn't have space, they didn't have funding, they didn't have room. Like it was like, no, 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 no. And so like my list disappeared. And I was like, oh no, now what do I do? And so it was very interesting because HST has a very different rotation schedule than the rest of like the other MIT departments that I'm aware of. So HST is not necessarily formal rotations. It's do what you need to do to figure out what lab you want to be in and tell us by the end of the year. And so what that meant is you don't have to be necessarily physically in a lab. You can just have a conversation with the PI and then decide based off of that. You can only go to group meetings. You could actually go into the lab and do a project if you wanted to, but there was not necessarily a formal structure. It was kind of up to you to decide how you wanted to find out what lab you wanted to be in. And so after kind of talking to all these professors, them saying, I don't have space or I don't have money, I don't have room, it led to me kind of like going kind of a little like, I was a little scared because I just didn't know what to do. And so it led to me kind of reaching out to a lot of PIs. And so just emailing kind of everyone, cold call emails of like, hey, do you have space? Do you have room? Do you do this kind of research? Like, I'm interested. And getting probably very few responses back. But I think the total number was like, I don't know, like 70, like 70 different professors that I had like a Zoom call with or had tried to interact with of like, hey, like, I don't know what I'm doing, but like, I need a lab space. I'm really interested in your work. Like, do you have space? Do you have room? And it was constantly a no, 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 no. And then one of these meetings that I was in with another PI who still didn't have the space, still didn't have the room. But she was like, actually, I am aware of someone who is a perfect match for you, who I think is starting up a brand new project. And I think it will work if you, but I don't know if she has the money. And that was my PI, Paula Ham. And she's like, I will send you an intro email. You talk to her, so you see. And I think within the first like 2 seconds of meeting Paula, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is my PI. Like I need to work with you. Like I have to work with you. And she was like, yes, like let me see if the funding can like be for a grad student, but otherwise, like this would be great. I meet with this co-PI who was the one who had the grant that we were kind of in question of like, okay, does this grant work for grad students? I meet with her. I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, like 100%, I want to work with you, et cetera. And I'm like asking the scary question of like, can you afford, like, can you pay for me? Like, will there be money? And she's like, yes, of course. And so this whole like journey of like a year of trying to reach out to different professors and trying to kind of figure out like what lab I'm going to be in was concluded within 24 hours of like meeting Paula, meeting my co-advisor, and then like less than like a couple hours later, getting the like, okay, we met with each other and we said, okay, you're in a lab now. And so it was a crazy search, which is why I would say I am not a representative like image of what a lab search looks like. But I think in terms of kind of just like how at the end of the day it will work out and like that kind of like inspirational story, I hope I can like push on to others because it might not be a perfect rotation. It might not be the first person you meet is the first person you're going to work with. I know a lot of people who that was the case. I was definitely not the case. And so happy to answer more questions if that was confusing. But yes, it was a very long trajectory, but I made it.
Perfect. And talk to us about the research you got to do with Paula.
Yeah, so now I do the exact thing I kind of wanted to do in the first place, which is drug delivery for the brain. And so specifically, I focus on childhood brain tumors. And so trying to develop new therapeutic strategies to deliver drugs to the brain is essentially my project. And so Paula's lab focuses on like layer by layer nanoparticles, which if you're not familiar, is essentially a way to have a drug encapsulated within different polymers. Each polymer is kind of um, optimized and specialized to do different functions. And so at the end of the day, what it would look like is you would deliver your, medicine that's encapsulated within this nanoparticle. It would go through your bloodstream. It knows where the brain is, so it gets to the brain. Then it knows where the blood vessel of your brain is. So then it'll go to the blood vessel, get out of the blood vessel, and then it also knows where the tumor cell is. Then it's able to navigate to where the tumor is. And so it's more of a like sophisticated way of like designing kind of like drug carriers to get them exactly to what organ or tumor or whatever kind of like endpoint you want it to then deliver the drug in a localized place rather than having more systemic effects.
Perfect. And thank you for explaining it in a way that even an economist could understand, right? So you're doing research. You talked a bit about finding the PI and getting into the lab, which is a little bumpy, but I'm sure it built a little resilience. Talk to us a bit about outside of research, your experience as a graduate student at MIT so far. What are the great things, and maybe what are some challenges you still face as a graduate student?
Yeah, so I would say some of the great things, like, I don't know, I really enjoy being a student. Like, I think being in a position where I am paid to learn is like a really interesting concept. Again, coming from a background where I think as a graduate student, I get paid more than my family has had like in a year before. And so, like, it's an interesting kind of switch to be kind of like in a position where I just get paid to use my brain and I get paid to talk to people and to like mentor others, etc. So I think I really enjoyed that part. And I think also kind of going back on like what I mentioned that a lot of people at MIT are very collaborative and friendly. A lot of people are collaborative and friendly. And so like having classes and having people to kind of like work on like problem sets with, or like if you're ever interested in like starting a company, I think I've had so many people be like, I want to start a company. Would you want to join? And I'm like, you know, I would. If you like officially are offering me, I would be interested. And so I think just kind of like people always like having ideas and having interests. And so like, for example, one interest or like idea that kind of came up that we acted on was I had a couple of friends in my department be like, hey, like you're first gen, I'm first gen. There's no first gen organization for graduate students. Why don't we make one? And so we did that. And it was just kind of like from the spur of idea of like, we don't see it, and I feel like we would need it, and we are all right here, so we might as well do this. And so kind of taking that again, like collaborative idea making, and then kind of running with it and having kind of the space and the support from MIT to do so has been really just, I think, nice. In terms of challenges, I would say probably the main challenge, again, is more of an internal challenge, I would say, of like trying not to compare yourself to other people. And so like I was the only one in my like year, like cohort of my PhD program that was like a first gen Hispanic like background, both first gen like American, first gen like college student, low income, like all those kind of like labels essentially. I was the only one. And so kind of like there was a lot of times where I could feel isolated or like in general, like hearing them talk about how their grandfather invented the pacemaker or like hearing how like they come from like a family of professors and being like, oh wow, like we did not have similar experiences and trying to not like think of myself as lesser than because of that, I think was hard and I have getting over it now, but I think it was one of the biggest like challenges of like trying not to like compare myself or like see like, oh, they're doing so much better. They're getting papers out so much quicker. Like it must be something wrong with me. And it's not the case. It's not the case at all. And I promise you. But yeah, I think that was probably the main challenge.
Perfect. And thank you again for just being so brutally honest about what you're dealing with. So, because I know you well, one of the things I know you have is a prestigious fellowship. So, talk to us about what is a fellowship, particularly an external fellowship, and the particular fellowship that you have. Talk to us about it and the process maybe of getting it.
Yeah. So Uh, for those who don't know, fellowships are similar to scholarships. So scholarships like that you might have gotten in undergrad, it's usually like a one-time award in an amount of certain X dollars to help you fund your undergraduate. But for fellowships, it's more of usually a longer term payout. So it's like a bigger dollar amount paid over like 3 years or paid over 5 years. And so they essentially are a way for your PIs to pay less money for you because it kind of replaces the money. So instead of the PI paying out of their pocket, the fellowship comes from either a government or a foundation or some other agency that owns it to give it to you. So rather than your PI paying for you, it comes from that source, which in terms of like if you came in to MIT or like if you came into graduate school with a fellowship to your name, it makes it easier to find a lab because then you could say, hey, you don't need to have money for me. I have my own. And so that is very like enticing for PIs. But in my case, when I came into MIT, I did not have them. And so I think that could have also contributed to my lab search woes of like not having my own funding, which is not a requirement, but sometimes, especially when I joined, it was right after the pandemic. So a lot of PIs didn't have money because they didn't apply for new grants. So I think it was a very special like case thing that shouldn't apply to others in the future. Um, but still, regardless, I had trouble because I didn't have them. But now, when I was in my second year, I was like, you know what? I'm going to apply for some. I might as well. I knew that Paula or Professor Hammond was kind of thinking of switching her lab into a different focus. And so I kind of said to myself, okay, like if that is going to happen, I would need kind of my own monetary support just in case, because I don't want to change my topic. I could if I wanted to, and it's a normal thing that people do, but I wanted more kind of like stability and just also being able to say, like, I was competitive and I could win this award. And so I had applied to three fellowships in my second year. One was the NSF GRFP, which is a fellowship from the like National Science Foundation, which is I would say like a pretty prestigious one. Like I think a lot of people hear about it, know about it when you come to MIT. I didn't know about it until I was at MIT, which is why I only applied in my second year. I had also applied for the Forward Foundation Fellowship Program, which has now since been discontinued. Forward Foundation was also a very long-standing fellowship to help anyone who was underrepresented in any field. So whether that was in the sciences, whether that was in the humanities, et cetera. So I was, what's called, I applied to that one as well. And then I also applied for the Howard Hughes Medical Institute Gilliam Fellowship. So that is probably the one that I think Denzil is hinting at. So it's the more prestigious one, I would say. It's run by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which, if you're not aware, is kind of a private kind of sector medical research facility. Um, and so for the Gilliam Fellowship, again, it was catered for underrepresented students in the sciences specifically. And it was also for those who were interested and committed to equity and inclusion in science. So those who were interested in kind of improving DEI in academia. And so I had applied to all three of these fellowships in my second year, and I had actually won all three, which is crazy for me to say because I didn't think it would happen. But again, kind of the moral of the story, apply for things because you never know. But in terms of the Gilliam application, it was actually a team application. So it's not just me applying for this award and trying to win the money. It was me and Paula applying for the award. And so as a team, it was how committed we were to, yes, doing good science, doing good research, making a change in the field, but also how committed we both were to advancing equity inclusion in academia and in the biological sciences in general. But I hope that answered all your questions. I
Yeah,
could.
no, perfect. I think many students, as you said, aren't aware of these external fellowships. So I wanted to take this opportunity to have you, because you're a recipient, to talk
Yes.
about, how you got those. Um, so attendees, we're wrapping up. I just have a couple questions left for Kim. Um, place your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them shortly. So you have prestigious fellowships, and I'll just underline here at MIT and at many other schools, you can't just go and win 10 fellowships and get $50,000 each and then leave with $500,000 a year, right? There are limits as to how much you could benefit from external funds, etc. So Kimberly is not a wealthy individual because she has all these fellowships, because there are limits in terms of what you can stack upon each other. So you're doing this great research, you're well funded, you have a magnificent PI. What's next?
Yeah, great question. I don't know. I think is the easiest answer, and the real answer. Um, I think I have ideas of where I want to go, but I think there's some uncertainty in the future that I'm not exactly sure what is the most kind of like best way for me to kind of take what I want to do and then actually make it actionable. At the end of the day, I would say my goal is to still be in the sciences. I do value a lot, like kind of more communication aspect of like sharing what science is and sharing what my science is specifically with like the general public. And so whether I go into kind of policy or something of that nature, I don't know. But at the end of the day, I like science, I like my research. I like my specific like focus, but I also really do care about the mentoring and I really do care about like making inclusive and like accessible spaces. And so don't know what that's going to manifest at, but we'll see.
Um, I had another question, but I felt like you answered that. Tell me if you did. I had a question, what have you learned about yourself during your time in graduate school? I feel like your answer is going to be apply for everything, because your estimation of your fabulousness, for lack of a better term, usually is less than other people would think, right?
Yeah, so I would say, yeah, definitely apply for everything because you might as well. Um, but yeah, I think something else I learned about myself is kind of just like being more proud of where I came from and kind of realizing at the end of the day, like all of the challenges, all of the like things that I had faced, also like coming from essentially the middle of nowhere and then getting to somewhere like MIT, which I know we shouldn't necessarily like ostracize it. Like we shouldn't say like, oh, somewhere like MIT is so unattainable because it's not true. Um, but I think just kind of having that disconnect and like seeing how like if I said something to like my hometown or like family members of like, oh, I go to Harvard, I go to MIT, they'd be like, what is this? Like they kind of see me in some sort of way, but I think at the end of the day, here at MIT and realizing that there are not that many people of my background here, kind of just taking pride in the fact that I still made it here regardless, I think is the biggest like takeaway lesson of like really being proud of where I came from and that I made it here.
Nice. And my final question, Kimberly,
Yeah.
is knowing what you know now, what is one piece of advice you'd give to an undergraduate from an underrepresented background who is considering applying to a PhD program?
Yeah, I would say the biggest piece of advice, aside from apply, 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 just apply anyway. I think the other biggest piece of advice is find your mentors. Like find someone who can help guide you, especially if like you're in the first year of family to have done it. Like definitely find your mentors. It would not have been possible without mentors like my undergrad PIs who like encouraged me and like uplifted me. It wouldn't have been possible for like or undergraduate students, or at the time when I was an undergrad, the PhD student that I worked with. Like it would not have been possible without multiple levels of mentors to like help guide me through each and every phase. Like whether it was another student to help me like know what classes were going to look like, whether it was a PI to help me like see kind of bigger picture, like where I could go, whether it was an older grad student who could then advise me on how to become said grad student. Just in general, having multiple mentors in multiple phases, I think was the most critical. So I would just say find your mentors. Those mentors also likely will be writing your rec letters. And so the more they know you, the better of a rec letter they can write. And the better rec letter they write, easier time you'll have with applications, whether it's for a grad program, whether that's for a job in industry, whether that's anywhere, like regardless, your recommendation letters and like the relationships you have with your mentors is going to be really key.
Perfect. And in the academic world, what Kimberly just described is called the mentoring network. And there actually are some really fantastic PDF-like documents you can find by Googling that term that can help you think through all the different types of mentors you should be having to help you navigate life and the academy. So thank you so much, Kimberly. I see we have some questions, and I see one of our attendees has three questions. So let me start with someone with the first question, and then I'll go back to Robin's questions. Um, Critically, what has your work-life balance been like as a graduate student? How do you keep yourself from burning out while also ensuring you're committing enough time to your work? Great question, Walter.
That is a good question. I would say for me personally, it was a trial and error. I think coming into a program, I think I had this kind of like, I don't know, I think overhyping, if that's the word, like just kind of feeling like I had to be super productive. Like I had to be on top of things. I have to be like, go, 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 go. Have to like constantly working to kind of like prove to others that like I deserve to be here, which was not a good mental like mindset to be in. And so I think it took me kind of like having kind of this like mental realization of like, wait, what am I trying to prove and who am I trying to prove it to? And realizing that that was not worth my energy, that like I stepped back a little bit. And so now I would say do have a pretty good work-life balance in the sense of I basically forcefully make that balance. Like I am very strict with like what hours I am working. Like I am a 9 to 5 or like a 10 to 6 like weekday. Like I really try not to be here on the weekends unless like I absolutely have to for like a certain time point. But then if I am, I kind of will take an hour or two out of the work week to like leave early or like whatever I need to do. And so I just try, I think, to really maintain like what hours I'm working, what hours I'm going to respond to emails, like what are my productive hours, and I keep them there so that way I can go home and then kind of just disconnect and like do my other hobbies, do my other things, like etc. And so I think the main way to kind of keep yourself from burning out or keeping yourself like to have that work-life balance is to really value it yourself and then really enforce it. Like even if there's kind of external pressures and like sometimes you may need to bend, but then being able to kind of recuperate and take that step back when you feel like you need to is really important.
Perfect. Um, Another question is, how do you maintain a positive outlook when you face rejections from professors?
Yeah, I try to maintain a positive outlook with most things. And so when it comes to like rejections from professors, I think a couple of things. One, it's like usually the biggest one is like taking a step back and realizing that it's nothing personal. Like it's usually like some other external factor that causes that like quote unquote rejection. So like in my case, like a lot of professors didn't have space like physically, like there were no like benches available for students, or there was not like a desk, etc., available for students. So like that rejection from that, like there it's an external thing. So like whether there's no physical space or like no funding, like I have bills. I need money. So like I can't put myself in a situation where the PI doesn't even know that there will be funding because like Denzil said, like PhD programs, especially in the sciences, should be fully funded. That fully funded usually is your PI pays for you. And so if I was in a situation where the PI wasn't sure that they were going to be able to pay for me, I just didn't want to have that uncertainty. And so, like, in that sense, like, if they didn't have the money or they didn't have the physical space and they reject me because of that, that is them saying they didn't have the capacity to, like, train and mentor me. And that's not a personal thing. That's just a bigger thing because while I wouldn't want to be in a lab that I might not be getting funded or like might not have space to do my work, they as a PI and as a mentor are looking out for students in that sense as well of like they as a like manager shouldn't be willing to take on a student that they're not going to be able to support fully. So just try not to take it personal.
Perfect. Another question is, how do you overcome low self-confidence and not let it affect your communication skills?
Yeah, so again, I think that's more of a mental challenge, right? And so whatever kind of way you need to kind of break yourself out of that thought of like, oh, like I am lesser than, or I am not, as good as some other, like breaking yourself out of that train of thought and that like logic of thinking is really important, like first and foremost, because that's not true. But in the case that you are like in kind of this lower phase and like you kind of feel like the world is beating down on you a little bit, I think the main thing that you have to kind of like think of is like how far you've come and like how much work it took for you to get here. And so like in terms of your communication, like if you need to tell someone like, hey, I need to take a step back really quick, like I need to like take a day off to like rethink, recalibrate, that is fine. If it is something where you've made a commitment and like you kind of need to see it through, then you can do so. But at the same time, like I would just say give yourself grace, essentially.
Perfect. Another question, if you had the opportunity to change one aspect of your graduate or research experience, what would you change?
What was that? Sorry, change one aspect of.
If you had the opportunity to change one aspect of your graduate or research experience, what would you change?
I I mean, the easiest answer is I wish I found Paula sooner. Um, but at the end of the day, even if I said that, that wouldn't have been the case because, again, external factors wise, if I had reached out sooner, the grant that I was talking about with this co-PI and like whether or not they could fund me, that only happened in May. And so if I had reached out earlier in like September, the answer would have been no, we don't have space, sorry. And so like it had worked out by like grace of uh you know so I don't think even like that would be a right answer because even if I said, oh, I wish I found poly sooner, I could get started sooner, other powers were at play and like it wouldn't have happened anyway. So I think aside from that, the only other thing I would say that I could have like wished was different or wished I changed, I think just coming in more confident and staying more confident instead of kind of being beaten down more by myself of like comparisons.
Perfect. The next question we have, I think you addressed it, but let's go to see if you have other things that you want to talk about. What was one of the most valuable lessons you've learned during your journey to MIT?
To or at MIT?
Two.
Okay. Yeah, so I would say I feel like I touched on it a little bit. So I think some of the valuable lessons is being confident in yourself, finding your mentors, like finding people who can support you. Um, but I think also just in general, like dreaming big. Like I feel like there is no harm in like having goals for yourself and having dreams and aspirations and in whatever way they manifest is fine. Like it's not like what's the right word to phrase it? I don't know. When I was an undergrad, I didn't know research was a thing until like my second-ish year because I saw other people do it. And I was like, oh, okay, like I'll look into that. And I joined my research lab in my third year, joined it in my third year, really enjoyed it. But at the same time, I was like, oh, like, like being a professor, like that must be something that like, people who are super privileged or like have certain backgrounds can achieve. Like it's out of touch. It's out of touch. And having a mentor come in and be like, no, it's not. Like you can do it. I did it. You can do it. And I think having someone being able to kind of drag you out of that, like kind of like that low, like self-esteem thing is important, but also being willing and able to dream big of like, no, I do see myself in your position. I do see myself as a professor, or I do see myself as this like leader of a company or a CEO, et cetera. Like kind of just like being willing to have that lofty dream and putting in the like work, whether that's like physical work or more of a like networking, finding people to support you, finding people who can guide you, et cetera. All of that is very important. So yeah, I would say just overall being confident, finding your mentors, and just doing it because you never know what's going to happen.
Perfect. You talked a bit about the graduate first generation low income student group.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that that group does? And
Yeah.
why is it so important to you that such a group exists?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, so we co-founded GFLA or the Graduate First and Low Income Group here at MIT. Um, this was in 2023 officially. And so I think some of the things that we do is like try to bring in resources for these types of students. And so for those, again, like if you're first gen and low income, especially, you may not be as familiar with like more like how things work or like how do you do your taxes as a graduate student? How do you find a lab? Like these types of questions. How do you manage like expectations when like you have like a lab and like your PI saying one thing and you don't really know how to interact with it? How do you maintain your mental health and like maintain kind of like work-life balance, like people were saying earlier in the chat? Like, how do you kind of do these things? And that kind of like knowledge from other older students is really important, but also bringing in speakers and guests who can also talk to these students on like how to do these things is the main thing we do, but also in general just building community, like having people who are from similar backgrounds is really important. So then you can kind of just have someone who gets it, like someone who knows how it feels to like be in a similar situation because maybe they themselves are also the only one in their program who are of X identity. And so it was just really important, I think, from a community aspect, from a resource aspect, to have something like this at MIT. And we have seen here at MIT, there is such a big support for the undergraduate students. So for undergraduate first-gen students, I would say MIT almost like excels by miles of like how much they support their undergraduate students. But kind of seeing that lack at the graduate level was a little sad, I think, for us. And so we really wanted to try to change that. And we are still trying to kind of like adapt and change some of those things because being first gen or being low income doesn't just go away when you graduate with your undergraduate degree. It persists and it keeps going at every single stage you go, whether that's a grad student, whether that's a postdoc, whether that's in industry, whether that's when you're a CEO or a director or a dean, et cetera, like it persists. And so having that representation and also having a group that can be a support system is important, I would say.
Perfect. So, Kimberly, thank you so much. This was a great way to wrap up the series for this admission cycle of MIT Mondays. Thank you again for being so candid. And thank you to our attendees who joined us live or who may be watching the recording. Best wishes for those of you applying to graduate school this cycle. And we definitely hope you're considering MIT, and we'll look forward to welcoming you in the fall. So thank you all. Thanks so much, Kimberly. Thank you, Jocelyn. And thank you to all the attendees. Take care.